What's your carnal theory?
Hey there, you're listening to Carnal Theory, where we talk with experts from around the world to learn how taking command of our sexual story affects our personal wellness, sexual experiences, and relationships with ourselves and others.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda, and today it's just me on Carnal Theory. Today, I am sitting down with Marla Renee Stewart. Marla is a sexologist, a sexual strategist, educator, and coach at Velvet Lip Sex Ed, as well as the co-founder of the Sex Down South Conference. She has researched sexuality in a variety of domains and has inspired people to be the best that they can be while embracing their sexual energy. Marla, it's so great to have you on today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be on.
We, for those who have never listened before, ask our guest to propose a carnal theory for us to consider. And this is supposed to challenge a presumption or perception that we might have in regards to our monthly theme. And this month, we are talking about group sex, which I think has a plethora of misperceptions, misconceptions around it. So I'm really excited to dive in. And at the end of the episode, after we've spoken for a while about it, we'll restate the carnal theory so that we can kind of leave with a potentially new perspective on it. So Marla, would you like to kick us off with your carnal theory?
Absolutely. So my carnal theory is that group sex doesn't mean that you need group effort, that, it needs a group effort. You really just need at least one leader who is willing to coordinate the group engagement.
So I have a lot of questions about like the technical, practical side of that. But before we dive in any deeper, I would love to hear what you think, like the definition of what group sex is. Maybe not like definition, like dictionary definition, but what group sex really is in comparison to what we think it might be based on what pop culture and social media and such is telling us it is.
So, there's group sex is sort of the umbrella of all the different kinds of different types of group sex. So if we were to just talk about group sex, we could be talking about threesomes, we could be talking about orgies, we could be talking about gangbangs, we could be talking about, sex competitions, we could be talking about lots of different things that are considered group sex. So it's a pretty broad term, but it really just involves more than the customary two people.
Mm-hmm. And with that, so I feel like a lot of people think of threesomes, like when they hear group sex, probably one of the first things that they think of is orgies and threesomes. And oftentimes it's like super romanticized. Not that it's not like a great, wonderful thing to do, but it's like there's all this practical side. There's this practical side of engaging with more than one other person, because as we've talked about a lot in our past episodes and in all of our social media content, like communication is so important during sex. And often we're talking about one other partner, but when you bring more partners into it, communication, I feel like the need for good communication, it goes up, exponentially. So what do you think is like the key way to make sure that there is this healthy communication amongst all group sex participants versus like, your usual one-on-one communication? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially almost the same in the sense that you want to know what people's expectations are.
Yeah.
So when you go into a group sex situation, number one, as maybe a leader, right? Somebody going into that, you have to ask if it's something that's planned, right? Asking everybody who is, what their, guidelines are, what the parameters are for them, if they have any expectations, what your expectations are of them, any kind of sexual boundaries that they might have are going to be important. Any kind of other additional elements they want to bring in, any kind of sexual goals that they might have, I think are really, really important to get from each person and to really make sure that it's compatible. I think sometimes when you are engaging in group sex and people are on different pages, that is when it doesn't turn into a great situation. And that's when it can really be almost kind of traumatizing in the sense of, I tried that group sex thing, but it wasn't so great. And so I'm good. I don't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I really, encourage people to make sure that if they're getting into a group sex situation, that they're always communicating, same as if it was a one-on-one partner, except for it's one on everybody, whoever the leader is, because I suggest always having a leader, but a coordinator, whatever, and talking to each individual person and just making sure they're compatible. Because then once you get all of their information, you can say, hey, well, this is not really compatible with everybody. So maybe, we can try to get you in another time. Mm-hmm. So that's what I believe. I think it comes down to that kind of communication and one-on-one and making sure that everybody is cool with everything else.
Yeah. And what would you say is like the action step to take if someone is, maybe there's been a miscommunication. Like I'm not saying like someone is purposely trying to break those boundaries. But if you're in a group sex situation and someone is on a different page and is having trouble communicating effectively, how do you proceed in a situation like that?
Like during the actual group sex or beforehand?
Like during.
During. So I think it's important for the leader to make sure that they recognize, like, if someone's uncomfortable or someone's doing something wrong, to hopefully it's more than just three people, or maybe not hopefully, but if it's more than three people, or if it's a group sex situation, you can kind of maybe if, I don't know, say there's 10 people, mm-hmm. And if it's two of you, maybe you and the other person who is having trouble communicating or whatever, maybe you can pull them aside and just say like, hey, let's go talk for a second while everybody else is still enjoying themselves. You don't want to ruin a good group moment because it's going to come off as like, I will never invite that person again. Mm-hmm. So you really want to make sure that you are doing it with grace, pulling someone aside, for whatever, and making sure that they understand, hey, this is appropriate or inappropriate, or tell me what you really want so I can make it happen, or making sure that their needs and the group's needs are also being met at the same time. So I would say that. Now, if it's a threesome and it's just, it's two and one person is really like, not communicating well or looking dissatisfied in some way, shape, or another, I think it's important just to have a sit down and talk and pause. Yeah. Right. There's no harm in just pausing and just, making sure that both people are everybody that is on the same page to make it a more pleasurable experience.
Totally. And I feel like a lot of that kind of plays into knowing when you're at a state where you can communicate and hear people's communication, that communication is a two-way street. So when you're at a place where you are like ready for that, like you have the skills to do that successfully, how do you know you are ready for like stepping into this situation? I don't like the word situation, experience. Like if someone's been fantasizing about it for a while, like, how do you know if it's like time to take that step?
I think it's just one of those things where you have to listen to your gut, Mm-hmm. But I think it's really, really important to have emotional stability. When you aren't having emotional stability, that's when things can really go awry. So, ensuring that you have emotional stability. So, if you're on, psychological meds, making sure you're taking your meds, or making sure you haven't come into something that has been you're not emotionally distraught about something. If you've had a recent death, or you've there's been some sort of trauma, it's really important that you really don't engage in something like that, because it just kind of piles on the stress that you're already having. So I think it's super, super important to have the emotional stability to go into a group sex situation so that you are not, so that you are able to enjoy yourself the way that you should be enjoying yourself, and that everybody else is also enjoying you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you have advice for where to find communities that also want to partake in that? Like, if you're like, for me at this moment, I'd be like, I have no idea even where to turn to find that leader who wants to be the organizer. How do you find people like that, those communities?
So I think it's all about finding group sex communities, and the way that you really find group sex communities are like swingers clubs, sex clubs, folks who generally are going to be a little bit more open. So maybe some sex positive spaces, places where there are play parties, or finding where the nearest play party is going to be your best bet in trying to find a group situation. As far as leaders, there's always going to be, I feel like there's always going to be a leader somewhere. Whenever, I have a friend who's a great group sex leader. She does these amazing competitions, like sexual competitions with people. It's really fun to watch, and it's really fun to see all the group sex interactions. And I know for myself, I am more of a director when it comes to group sex. So it's more like do this and do that. And, and I think that helps people to, really have fun and just not worry too much about what they're doing, and instead just listening to someone while they do whatever it is that they're doing. So I think it's just, finding those group sex places like the sex clubs, the swingers clubs, the play parties, and sometimes it might just be Googling play parties near me. I don't know,
Totally.
But FetLife.com is like a pretty decent resource to have around events around folks. And then if you're in maybe swingers lifestyles, there's lots of different swinger websites that you can go to see what's going on near you, what sex clubs are happening in your city.
Yeah. You mentioned these competitions. What does that look like? What is a competition at a group sex engagement?
Yeah. So, a competition that one of my friends recently did. So she had people, there was like a pussy eating contest. So I think you had one person, and then you had however many people wanted to enter into the competition. And then they would just go one at a time as to, eating somebody out. So that would be, so that person would be the judge of who, would win that contest. So, maybe it's a pegging competition, or maybe it's a dick sucking competition. So there's lots of different, things that you could do. But that was the most recent one that I attended.
That's so fun. I hadn't even thought about how you could make it more of like a fun, playful game. Like I feel like I had imagined, there's got to be ways to make it more like laid back and fun. But that's just like sounds really fun. You do a lot of work in sex education. How do you think that we can, well, I guess it's two-part. Do you feel like it's important for group sex to be discussed in sex education? And if so, how?
Group sex to be discussed like in young people's sex education, or group sex to be discussed like in, I think it depends, right?
Yeah.
I'm all about making sure folks are being, sexually responsible in how they move and how they want sex, and how they, how their bodies are engaging. And so I think with, group sex, like, should it be taught in schools? Probably not, right? I'm not I'm probably not going to advocate for folks who are 18 and under to go for the group sex. I really think that that is a time of exploration. I think as a young person, it really is a time of exploration, and maybe, we have these experiences maybe in college or beyond college or college age or whatever. So, I think that education would have to definitely come later. I wouldn't say that would be a part of like a comprehensive sex ed program or anything like that. Like, definitely, probably not. I think this is more of the advance. This is like for the folks who are very, who might want to be a little bit more sexually adventurous and want to go into this realm. So it reminds me of like being at hedonism in Jamaica. It's like you go, and if you haven't been there for the first time, you might be a little scared. So you stay on the prude side with your clothes on, and you might, you might get to the line and venture to see if what the naked people are doing. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe the second day, maybe I'll go and, I'll get nude. Okay, I'll get nude, but I won't do anything, or I won't, whatever. And so, you might want to take those little baby steps there. But I think it's just about, it's really just about like, taking your time and not rushing yourself to try to engage in something that is new and different. And then I also think, you should always do your research. Like, have your friends had group sex? What are your friends doing? Like, are they, asking them about their threesomes or orgies and how they felt about them, and what happened and how they felt. I think those are always really great ways to get yourself a little pumped up into being like, I can do this. They did it. I can do it. I can do it too. So
I like that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this kind of hushness to the topic of group sex, but it also seems like it's way more common and popular than we even realize. And what's strange is that social media and pop culture, as I mentioned earlier, is like not up to date with its representations of group sex, and therefore might like lead to people thinking that they know what they're getting into but aren't. Have you come across people who may have one expectation and those expectations are totally out of line with what actually happens in a group sex scenario?
Oh my gosh, that happens all the time. That it happens all the time, mostly because folks are watching a lot of porn and they're seeing these highly coordinated efforts of doing things. And then they're like, oh, that's what it's like. I'm going to do that. And then they get into a situation and they're like, maybe they're underwhelmed. They're like, well, it didn't look like that porn that I watched or whatever. Yeah. So I think that is a huge problem, because you can't expect your sexual experiences to be just like a porn that you watched. Porn is meant to be entertainment. It's meant to help us get off. It's meant to arouse us. But it's not meant to educate. So that is a huge difference. And we need to understand that, like, hey, but unfortunately it is educating people. It's educating people in the ways that aren't necessarily going to be the best ways of knowing, sexual and sexuality education. So I think it's super, super important to think about that piece. But yeah, that happens all the time. Or it might happen in the opposite, where, I've had a couple go into a group situation and, they were like, okay, we have our boundaries. And then they go into the group situation and boundaries just fly out the window. And then they come back and like, oh, well, and then I was feeling some type of way. We said we weren't going to do this, but then at the time it felt right. And then we did this thing and now we're feeling, and so that can really complicate things if you don't, if you have those rules in place and you aren't I guess, abiding by them in the way that you and your partner or partners said that you were going to do. So that can really shake the foundation of your sexual relationship. And you might be hesitant to go back into the situation or go back to the swingers or sex club to do it again, because you're like, well, this happened last time. Is that same thing going to happen? Or is there going to be a different situation that we're not prepared for that might come up? So,
Yeah.
it all depends.
Yeah. And you mentioned, partners or couples. I think a lot of people, myself included, for a long time have thought of group sex situations as like a bunch of singles, like just having a good time. But of course, it's not that. And how does a couple enter that situation with, trust and safety?
Well, I think it's super, super important when couples, they have to talk about it first. You can't just jump into that situation, because that is not going to be helpful for you. So it's super, super important to, I say, read a lot of books first. Think about it. If you've been together for a long time, think about it for like 6 months. Think about it for like a year. Think about it, talk about it, mull over it over time. And then when you feel like, okay, it's time to jump into it, you can really jump into it and see. But that's after you've read a lot. That's after you've talked to people. That's after you've established any rules, boundaries, your what ifs. What if this happened, or what if that happened? Making sure you're emotionally stable to go into the situation. Those types of things need to be put in place in order for you to have a really good experience. And with Justin Lee Miller's book, Dr. Justin Lee Miller's book, he talks about tell me what you want. And a lot of those things, a lot of those fantasies have to do with having multiple people, in their sexual relationship. So I think it's important that we know that, hey, this is common, right? That fantasy is super common. And that also that there's so many other things that could get in the way of your sexual success when it comes to group sex experiences.
Yeah. What are some of those things? Like, what are those things that can get in the way?
I would say your feelings. So sometimes when people have sex with other people and they're like, this is better than having sex with my partner, or they get into a situation of like, oh my gosh, I just want to do group sex. I don't want to just have sex with one person anymore. I want to have group sex. Or maybe they get into a swinging situation and they're like, I just want to swap all the time, or I just want to, I just want to play around with others and flirt all the time. Or it could be like my partner has fell for someone. Or my partner has got emotionally attached to this person, and now I don't know what to do. So really evaluating, thinking about all those options and saying like, hey, do you want to do group sex because emotionally you can handle it and that this is a detachment for you? Or do you think if you went into this situation that you could get emotionally attached to someone? And I think that is going to be super important to be self-aware and know that about yourself.
Yeah. I'd say that fear would be a huge thing for myself. Like the fear that, feelings can get involved, even though the intention was not that at all. How do you,
I had a couple that was like, you made a different sound. You made a different sound with someone else than you made with me. I've never heard that sound. It sounded like a great sound. How come I can't get you to do that sound with me? So jealousy might arise, like lots of different things.
Yeah. And I would assume like if you haven't had a wide array of sexual partners and you go into a group sex setting and you're starting to explore a bit more, you're learning about yourself in that experience. And therefore, it could be that your partner is jealous, but maybe you could just use that moment to say, hey, I've just learned something about myself. I just learned something about what I enjoy that I didn't realize I enjoyed. And like, let's try and do that together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really would love to hear a few more if you have any more like common misconceptions that people come into these situations with, like what is something people don't realize before going into a group sex setting?
So I think some people don't realize, like, how they're getting into this situation, right? So I've been in group sex situations where I was the focus, and that felt amazing, right? Like, yes, focus all your energy on me, right? I've also coordinated sessions for past partners where I've had, I for one of my past partners, I coordinated an orgy for her. And so it was like, hey, I have all these people that want to have sex with you, and I know you want to have sex with some of them, like, here you go. But I was kind of like, I'm going to take myself out of the situation. Like, I didn't actually want to participate, but it was nice coordinating everything. So it was, I think it just really depends. On the situation, but I forgot your question because I feel like I had a point.
Some like misconceptions people have of group sex.
Oh, misconceptions. Yes. So misconceptions could be that, like, that everybody gets a turn. Right. Because sometimes, like I said, if I was the focus, then like not everybody's getting a turn. I'm the focus. So sometimes, it's great if everybody gets a turn or whatever, or if that is the situation, or if it's just, people on me, and if everybody's agreed to that, then that is fine. I'm having all sorts of flashbacks now. I'm just like, oh yeah, and there's that time, and then there's that time. But anyway, and then there's also misconceptions of around like that everybody has to be involved in the orgy or involved in the group sex situation. So like I said, I kind of pulled myself out of the situation. I didn't necessarily have to be in this situation. And I had a great time being a voyeur and viewing. And I'm a compersion person. So I was just like, yes, get it, go ahead. I was like cheering them on, like, so, I think one of the misconceptions around like everybody has to have a turn, I don't necessarily think is true. And I think there's all sorts of kinds of dynamics in group sex that make that possible.
Yeah. So what would you say are like the key things you should take with you to an orgy, like, or to a group sex situation? Like, are there practical things that you would need?
Well, with the communication piece is just making sure, like, what do y'all want to do? Like, what is your goal? What do you want? Because sometimes I know I like to come into sexual situations with goals. Maybe not everybody has a goal, but I think it's great to come in with goals because then you're like, I want this done. And then it gets done. And you're like, yes, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Check.
Yeah, exactly. And now we can do whatever anybody wants, So I think it's important to make sure you have some intentions around going into it, but making sure that everybody's on the same page, as far as maybe using protection. I've been to play parties where it's like protection is mandatory or whatever, like, or I've been to some play parties where like protection is however you want it. If you want it, don't want it, whatever. So just making sure that everybody is on the same page as far as their sexual responsibility and sexual health, I think is great. And making sure what your, boundaries and limits are. And what else should people take away? I think people should, I always say whoever's a coordinator or whoever's the leader of the situation, I think they always need to have a bonus. Like, what is the bonus to being in this orgy, in this situation? Because sometimes I think that can help them to come back for more, or come back if the experience was really great. Like, and on top of the orgy, I had blah, 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 or whatever it is. Maybe it was a nice breakfast or a buffet or, I don't know what it is, it could be anything, but I think having that extra bonus is a good thing.
I love that. Well, I want to ask you one last question. I know your theory is that not everyone has to be participating. Well, not everyone does have to be participating, but not everyone has to be that leader, that organizer, right? But when you are in that setting, what is something that the leader can do to make sure everyone's at least having a pleasurable experience,
Oh, I think always being aware and checking in, making sure that like people are getting what they need. Just always being aware of that situation. So I think you can't be self-absorbed, right?
Yeah.
You can't be like, let me get mine. You really have to think about other people, and it's really in service to other people. So you're really putting them to the forefront and saying like, hey, what can I do for you to make this experience awesome? Because I know if you're doing awesome, I'm also doing awesome, and I'm feeling good about this situation. So I think that is one of the best things that you could do.
Yeah. So you wouldn't be like the leader and also like energy is going towards me today, because then you can't focus on other people. Totally.
Right.
That makes sense. Well, as we wrap up, I want to ask you to restate your carnal theory again for our audience to consider.
Absolutely. So my carnal theory is that group sex doesn't mean that you need a group effort, and that you really just need at least one leader who is willing to coordinate the group engagement.
Thank you so much. I feel like I know a lot more about the practicalities of group sex, and I think that that's the first step towards, being ready to do it yourself and to engage in it yourself healthfully. If any of you want to learn more, you can head to our Instagram at Carnal Theory, or our website, which is new and improved mysexbio.org. You can also check out Marla's work on Instagram at @1Marla Stewart or at Velvet Lips Sex Ed. And you can check out her work at velvetlipsexed.com. Marla, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. I look forward to checking it out.
Definitely.
Carnal Theory is produced by My Sex Bio. Our sound design is by Audrey Cohane, and our theme music by Min the Universe. My Sex Bio is an educational platform built to empower people like you to take command of your sexual biography. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify at My Sex Bio. Visit our website and join our e-letter at mysexbio.org, and support our work by joining our Patreon. Thank you.